A vintage classic, bounce like elastic, old school.
In 1937, actor Lionel Barrymore tripped on set, breaking both his hip and his kneecap. To keep him filming, MGM's Louis B. Mayer allegedly gave him $400 worth of cocaine a day to help him with the pain. Barrymore is now best known as the villainous Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life. That seems like an excessive amount of cocaine. Let's see how much that would be adjusted for inflation. $400 in 1937 is worth about $8,883 today. Must have been some really low-grade stuff for him not to have had a heart attack. The best guess for the next civilization-threatening volcanic eruption is about 17,000 years from now. It is estimated that it will eject 1 million tons of pyroclastic material, which is crazy because it seems to me that the world is already on fire. The sun is not silent. It produces sound waves through various processes like solar flares, coronal mass ejections, and helioseismology. These waves are so powerful, they can theoretically reach 100 decibels, comparable to a rock concert or a busy nightclub. You can't hear the sun because sound requires a medium to travel, and space is essentially a vacuum, lacking a medium for the sound waves to propagate. Do y'all remember that episode of Rick and Morty, where they went to that planet and the sun just screamed the entire time? The Bible contains a second list of laws, also known as the Ten Commandments. Scholars call it the Ritual Decalogue, and it includes a law saying that you should not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Which, I mean, you really shouldn't. Auschwitz had a brothel where female prisoners were forced to have sex with selected male inmates as a part of a reward system for the male inmates, not the female ones. It takes longer to grow back a human toenail than it does to grow an actual human. Pregnancy lasts around 40 weeks, or it can take up to 18 months for a toenail to grow back. Also, the rate that your nails grow is directly correlated to the length of the phalange. So your middle finger grows the quickest, your pinky toenail grows the slowest, and also, not to mention, in 2019, a man died less than 24 hours after eating a hot fish cake, which burned his throat and caused it to swell so much that he choked to death. The doctor who performed the autopsy said the symptoms were normally seen in people involved in house fires caused by smoke inhalation. Where the hell did you get a fish cake that hot? McDonald's? That wouldn't surprise me. In 1975, the CIA created a gun that could shoot darts, causing heart attacks. Upon penetration of the skin, the dart left just a tiny red dot, and the poison worked rapidly and denatured quickly, leaving no trace. I was in 1975. Makes me wonder what kind of weapons we have now. The man who took the photo used in the original I Want to Believe promo poster for The X-Files claims to be a reincarnation of various prophets, including Jesus and Muhammad, and that he has had contact with aliens since he was 5 years old. So, like, realistically, he was the perfect person to capture such a picture. In 2038, systems using 32-bit integers and time-sensitive / measured processes will suffer fatal errors unless updated to 64-bit. So it will essentially be Y2K38. So if you do not want to be affected by this, always update your systems, upgrade your electronics, and don't. In Sumerian mythology, the god Enki is believed to have created the Tigris and Euphrates rivers by masturbating and ejaculating into their empty riverbeds. Salty. Boanthropy is a psychological disorder in which a human believes themselves to be a cow. Moo. Prairie madness, which affected settlers and especially immigrants in the prairies in the 1800s, was a mental breakdown due to isolation of living on such a remote land. It mostly disappeared when telephones and railroads became available. So back then people went crazy because they didn't have anyone to talk to. And nowadays people go crazy because there's too many people to talk to. That's one of the downsides to internet and cell phones, is that everyone feels like they should constantly have access to you because of it. And like, bro, sometimes I just want to crawl in a hole and be alone. Aristotle supported infant exposure in ancient Greece, arguing that deformed babies shall not live. Unwanted kids, which were often females or sickly children, were left outdoors to die naturally because it was seen as less brutal than direct killing. But we all know that just dying from the elements and or starvation is probably a whole lot more brutal than if they would have just, you know what I mean? Trigeminal neuralgia, also known as the suicide disease, has no cure and causes sudden sharp pain in the face that is so intense it's often described as one of the most painful conditions in existence. The more you hear a lie, the more likely you are to believe it. It's called the illusory truth effect. So basically, if you hear something enough, you get desensitized to it until eventually you're like, yeah, that sounds about right. It's like the frog in the pot of boiling water. Suzanne Capper was just 16 years old when she was tortured and killed by people she thought were her friends. They broke her arm, shaved her head, beat her, forced her to listen to extremely loud music for several hours on end, burned her with cigarettes, pulled out her teeth, and scrubbed her with a brush until her skin came off before putting her into a tub of disinfectant. Eventually, they drove her to a wooded area, doused her in gasoline, and set her on fire. Suzanne survived long enough to name her attackers, but died from her injuries. Kids are terrible, teenagers especially. Glad I never was one. Klaus Skarbowski was shot and killed by Marianne Bachmeyer in a crowded courtroom in 1983. Klaus, a 35-year-old sex offender, had kidnapped Marianne's 7-year-old daughter Anna and murdered her. At the time of his murder, he was on trial for this crime. Bachmeyer was convicted of manslaughter and unlawful possession of a firearm. She was originally sentenced to 6 years in prison, but was released on probation after serving 3. I don't think she should have gotten any prison time at all. That's just me. After he bombed Flight 629 in 1955, killing 44 people, including his mother, who was the main target because he wanted the insurance payout, the bomber, Jack Gilbert Graham, said, "I don't feel remorse. Everybody pays their way and takes their chances. But you weren't wanting to pay your way. You were wanting your mother's life insurance policy to pay your way." So I feel like it's a little bit different. In 2004, Gail Laverne Grimes died in the hospital after surgeons spent 6 hours attempting to separate her skin from a couch that she had fused into. Not to be confused with Lacey Fletcher, the disabled woman whose parents left her on a couch for 12 years. This is a different person. Gail had suffered a broken leg in the 90s and sat on her couch while it healed, of course. And then after it healed, she somehow managed to break the same leg again. So that instilled in her a fear of breaking her leg for a third time. So she one day sat down on the couch and never got back up again. And apparently she lived with somebody that was her husband, but wasn't really her husband, but they called each other husband and wife. And Gail's family even came and visited her. And apparently nobody noticed that she was slowly fusing to the couch until one day, after 6 years of sitting on the couch, her brother visited and realized that she was having trouble breathing. And he finally called 911. When EMTs arrived, they tried to lift her off the couch, but couldn't because she was fused to it. And the apartment was so filthy that workers had to wear protective clothing while trying to separate her from the couch, until eventually they realized that they were going to be unable to separate her from the couch, so they just decided to take her, couch and all, to the hospital. The surgeons tried for 6 hours to save her life, but unfortunately were unsuccessful. So this goes out to all my people that have a significant other that's like deep in depression or something, and they don't want to get up, they don't want to move. Tell them this story. Tell them, hey, do you want to end up like Gail Grimes, who just one day said to herself, this is survived footage of the collapse of the World Trade Center in 2001. The John Thomas sign is an inside joke for radiologists about the position of a penis during an x-ray. If it points toward an injury or irregularity, it is considered a positive John Thomas sign. Who is John Thomas and why was this named after him? Andrea Yates was a devoutly religious person, as was her husband Russell. She decided that the only way to let her children enter heaven was to kill them and allow herself to be punished for the crime, thereby redeeming them in the eyes of God. So on June 20th, 2001, she drowned her 5 children in the family bathtub. She said, "My children were not righteous. They were doomed to perish in the fires of hell." These are the officers that made the discovery. And I can imagine they would just never be the same again. Between 1916 and 1926, a mysterious neurological illness called encephalitis lethargica, aka the sleep plague, caused a widespread epidemic that caused adults to suffer from headaches, fever, lethargy, double vision, and in severe cases, they would fall into a coma-like state where they could not be roused. A third of the children affected experienced strange changes in their behavior, many of them becoming delinquents. Boys between the ages of 5 and 18 years were the most affected. Symptoms included a change of personality, restlessness, irritability, irregular sleeping habits, emotional instability, and temper tantrums that included unpredictability, which doctors described as moral insanity. More extreme cases included aggression and a shameless sexual activity. Many surviving patients ended up making a full recovery and returning to their everyday lives. However, the majority of patients developed psychiatric and neurological disorders, and some would even spend years in a comatose state. Now, somewhere around the 1970s, these survivors that were still kicking it, even though they were basically comatose, were given a drug for Parkinson's, and they miraculously made a sudden and full recovery, waking up, 6 decades later. But unfortunately, the cure was short-lived, and they would soon revert back to their comatose state, often dying. It really makes me wonder, if the people that were in the comatose state, if they had a form of locked-in syndrome, where on the outside you're a vegetable, but on the inside you know everything that's going on around you. That would be my biggest fear, is to have locked-in syndrome. And I'm in the hospital room surrounded by my family, and I'm just screaming. On December 5th, 2006, Ryan Waller was at home at his apartment with his girlfriend, Heather Kwan. Their apartment was broken into by a man named Richie Carver and his father, Larry Carver, who used to live at the apartment. Richie Carver shot Ryan twice in the head and proceeded to the next room and shot Heather in the head, killing her. When Ryan did not show up for Christmas dinner, his family began to get worried and alerted the police. When the police arrived on the scene, they found Heather deceased, but Ryan miraculously still alive with 2 bullets in his head. Now, the police were suspicious that this was a case of domestic violence gone wrong, even though Ryan is very obviously disoriented and in pain and bleeding. The police, instead of taking him to get medical attention, took him to be interrogated. He was kept in a police car for 4 hours and an interrogation room for another 2 hours. The entire time, Ryan gets more and more disoriented because he's got 2 bullets in his head. Finally, one of the detectives said that he needed medical attention. But unfortunately, it was too late, and he survived for another 35 days in the hospital before succumbing to his injuries. The interrogation is available on YouTube, but please be warned, it is very disturbing. This is Dr. Clark's spinal apparatus, which was a device aimed to solve the problem of scoliosis while still giving movement to the patients, unlike other treatments of its time, circa 1878. In 18th century England, people would pay to attend Bedlam, which was a private lunatic asylum, to watch the mentally ill as entertainment. And now we just watch them for free on the internet. There was an early Victorian belief that the jarring motion and overwhelming noise of a train could drive sane people into madness and could even trigger violent outbursts. And I get that. Because if I'm out and about and I use a public restroom and the toilet flushes too loud, I'm in June of 2017, Jacob Stockdale murdered his mother and his brother. He and his family had been on an episode of Wife Swap in 2008, and they were portrayed as a very wholesome, religious, bluegrass music making family. Everything is not always what it seems on the surface. This is a 7.7 magnitude earthquake in Bangkok. Wow. The Edgewood Arsenal human experiments involved at least 254 chemical substances, but focused mainly on mid-spectrum incapacitants, like LSD, THC derivatives, benzos, etc. Around 7,000 U.S. military personnel and 1,000 civilians were test subjects over the span of almost 3 decades. Jamestown Governor John Ratcliffe, the villain in Disney's Pocahontas, died horrifically in real life. After being tricked, ambushed, and captured, women removed his skin with mussel shells and tossed the pieces into a fire as he watched. They skinned his face last and burned him at the stake. Gotta admit, it's pretty damn creative. Long-term administration of ketamine induces erectile dysfunction. While a babysitter in Kansas City was tucking in the child that she was watching, the child said that he was afraid of monsters under the bed. So the babysitter, of course, in an effort to refute the child's fear, checked under the bed and came face to face with a 27-year-old man who apparently used to live at the residence, but who was under a protection from abuse order, which required him to stay away from the property. An altercation ensued with the babysitter, and then the man fled on foot, but was quickly apprehended by police. Could you imagine how fucking terrified a babysitter would be? Just lottie-dottie, no shlaboggle, let me check under the bed for monsters, and then he's just there like, this is a gorilla standing straight up. And it really gives me the creeps. Dr. Harold Shipman is believed to have murdered so many of his patients that his trial, where he was charged with the murder of 15 people, investigated only 5% of his speculated victims. And I thought Dr. Phil losing his psychiatry license was bad. In 2011, Alex Trebek, longtime host of Jeopardy, was woken by a burglar in his hotel room. He proceeded to chase the robber through the hallways in his underwear before tearing his Achilles. The thief was later apprehended. Ow. I hear a torn Achilles tendon is one of the worst pains imaginable. Sorry, Alex Trebek. Around 58 billion meals worth of food goes uneaten every year in the U.S. This sea lion was absolutely not fucking around. These are front-facing MRI scans. Thanks for watching.